we go. Okay. Someday I'll make sure to know how to do this. That's not part of. It's not part of the prescription. That's not part of the job description. All right. We do have to welcome a new member of the board of directors. I do note that Mr. Williams from the city is here. Wayne Williams, raise your hand. Everybody who knows, he's now the city representative who has replaced Merv Bennett. The requirement is that you bring desserts at every meeting now, and jellies. They really have. All right. Item number 2 is approval of the agenda. Is anybody?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is approved. And I see the greater Williams approaching now.
Yes, thank you.
Item number 3, public comment. I guess not. Any members of the public have any comments that they'd like to share that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, move to item 4, approval of the minutes of April 10, 2019. Can I have a motion or any?
So moved.
It's been moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved. Item number 5, the Citizen Advisory Committee monthly report. Mr. Godfrey, thank you.
Good afternoon, Jim Godfrey, Chair of the CAC. I'll quickly summarize what we went over at our CAC meeting last week. First of all, the city brought together a memo regarding the DOT, Department of Transportation, and the city informational signs. I think that was withdrawn 1 month before. This was a request to spend some money to upgrade the kits, electronics in those message signs on the CDOT right-of-ways around the city. Had a long discussion of that, had some additional information come forward. By and large, this is an investment to upgrade signs, to which some of them aren't working, to make them part of CDOT's information system and traffic management process. And at that point, the CDOT will take over maintenance and upgrade at that point of those devices. And CDOT is also doing the install maintenance. And the price of this kit is only about half of what needs to be done, and CDOT's picking that up. So this ends up being a cost avoidance issue. It's kind of like selling a house. You fix a few things and you sell it off, and so the CAC recommends approval of that recommendation. Also, the next series of items, there's about 4 or 5 line item transfers where the city's requesting movement out of one budget line item into several other line items. The CAC took the approach of listening to all 5, I think it was, of these transfers. All the money is coming out of the Academy Boulevard improvements. They weren't ready to execute that money this year. They're going to put it back in at next year's budget, so they're moving it out of that into these projects. The CAC took the approach of listening to all of these and then voting on them individually. And so, by and large, there were mixed votes. I think all of them had, I don't have the number of the votes right in front of me, but all of them had some nays, and most of them and all of them passed with yays. So if you're interested in those nay votes, here comes Rick.
I was going to ask Mr. Sonnenberg. Thank you, sir.
Rick bailed me out here. Okay, so the upgrade kits was recommended by a vote of 10-4. 10 yay, 4 no, yes. I'm sorry. Positive recommendation on the Black Forest Road transfer. The Intersection improvements for Tejon Roundabout was a 12-4 vote. 12 yea, 4 no. The intersection improvements for Prentice Parkway Roundabout, positive recommendation on a 14-2 vote. The traffic operations citywide mobility study, a positive recommendation of 13-3 vote on that. And the pedestrian transportation improvements, there was 2 votes brought forward. We split that because the city extracted a portion of it because of a policy issue. But on the Fillmore Street corridor, it was a 13-3 vote. So we had good discussions. I appreciate the information the city brought forward on those. And, well, you'll hear those presentations later. The city also brought forward 5 contracts with unanimous approval after discussion of those. The county brought forward, had 2 initial contracts with an add-on. West Colorado Avenue, some CSU line relocation contract area that I think that'll all be reimbursed by CSU, I believe, and Jennifer will cover that. Their overlay program, and then the add-on was Highway 105, some additional work and survey engineering work that needs to be done up there on a couple of streets near a school and a bank. And so Jennifer will explain that. We recommended approval on all 3 of those. And then just one issue, not to get into a big discussion, but the definition of maintenance projects and capital projects. After discussion with the chair and the vice chair, the CAC had voted to, or would like to, put together a subcommittee to kind of define or clarify what is meant by a maintenance project or a capital project. We're going to take the approach of having the member governments come in and describe how they define these projects and try to make the members of the CAC more informed. We'll put together some output for that and discuss that with you guys on whether we want to whether we want to tightly define what those are, given the guidance we have, or so we're going to look into those, and there'll be some way more discussion over the next couple of months as we work through that, but nothing definitive to give to you at this point. And I think that's about it for the CAC.
And if I might clarify just a little bit, Mr. Godfrey, thank you. The discussion that Mr. Gonzalez, I, and the others had just before coming in was not to have a subcommittee per se, but to have a working session where the member governments come in and talk about what the member governments believe is maintenance versus capital, and then have CAC and the member governments see if anything else needs to get done at that point in time.
Yes, thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Anybody, and I have one other comment to make, but we'll deal with that later. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Godfrey? Yes, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jim, thank you for your service and all of the
Bless you.
committee that we set up back in 2004 when we put this on the ballot, and I appreciate your service, and I value the input. The question I've got for you is kind of twofold. With respect to, it looks like 2 people kind of swung as to whether they voted yes or no in the votes, and 2 people voted no on everything, if I'm reading that in right. Or maybe it's a different group of people each time, but I appreciate the votes. I'm interested in what the articulated reasons were for the no votes on the different projects, if you recall.
On these projects, these particular group of requests, we did not get into that level of discussion. There were some consistency, but mostly different.
Okay.
I think, personal opinion, there was some discussion and question around all of these monies, with the exception of Black Forest, moved into what is called program funds, where the city and the RTA 2 created about 13 pots of, we'll call them pots, 13 categories of program funds that are general things like intersection improvements, traffic safety, and from the CAC's perspective, there's not as much clarity as they would like to see on what that money is being spent on or programmed to be spent on. And they had reasonably large carryovers from last year's budget added to this year's budget. And there was some question if you couldn't execute the money last year and you've got a larger pot this year and you're adding more money to it. But I've got to say that the city and Mike in particular did a good job of addressing those concerns. On these particular ones, I didn't delve into why people were voting no. I will say that, for your information, that on larger projects and that kind of stuff, we do tend to try to delve into that a little bit, but we did not on this one.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Avila.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say that on its face, that money taken out from South Academy Boulevard, when Mike called me to talk about it, I was like, no, no, it's like we always get money taken out and not in. And he explained that the South Academy is not ready yet, and that we have the monies there. So it doesn't make sense to have them just sitting there, and they could be put to use. But he assured me that we will get that money back. But I also understand that that's based on our vote to get that back for the South Academy projects. So I'm supporting this, but because on its face it sounded horrible for me, for my district. But after getting an understanding, I mean, after getting the information, I understand.
The only comment I want to make, Mr. Godfrey, Reb, and I see a couple of representatives from the city, is I want to commend all of you for this kind of deep dive. This is what the CAC, what I hope the CAC will do, and will bring really the deep dive into these particular projects with the dissent, with the concerns. So I want to commend you for doing that. Can I get a motion on the Citizens Advisory Committee monthly report?
Move approval.
In a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Godfrey. We are now to item number 6, financial reports. Best news, Bev.
Good afternoon. So we just received March's receipts of $8,548,000 compared to a monthly budget of $8,087,000. So we're ahead for the month, almost $461,000 or 5.7%. And that means for 3 months, we're ahead $1,987,000 compared to budget. For page 1. So page 2 shows how we compared to last year's actual. And for the month of March, we are ahead $93,000 and ahead year-to-date $998,000. Then pages 3 through 5 put the revenue in a revenue expense summary, and then the expenditures year-to-date. You'll notice on page 3 for roadway safety and traffic operations, and this is in the initial A list of projects, we have a negative expenditure, and that represents a cost share from either like utilities or a developer. So when you see a negative in that column, that's what it represents. And then on page 4, 2 items, ADA paratransit bus system vehicle replacement and van pool vehicle replacement look like they're over budget in those line items. However, when the original budget was approved, the city did not estimate enough carryover, so the actual carryover makes those items within what they will be in the amended budget. So are there any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Majewski? And seeing none, thank you, Beverly.
Thank you.
Item number 7, capital finance and public transportation contracts. And I'm just going to inquire of the members of the board, since CAC considered items A through F individually, do you want to consider them individually as well? Or do you want to consider them collectively? Or do you care? I'll do it collectively. It's,
Let's start with collectively. If some
All right.
issue arises, then we
all
can split
right,
it.
Mike,
Okay.
you have your direction.
All right, the first item that we're going to discuss is the CDOT IGA, and I'm going to have our new traffic engineer, Todd Frisbee, come up with Rob Help to explain that one.
Mr. Frisbee. It's Frisbee?
Yes, Mr. Frisbee, yes.
Thank you.
It is. Mike, just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. I am the new city traffic engineer. I've been on the job for just over a month now, and so I thought since we have a traffic-related item on the agenda, I thought it'd be a good opportunity for me to come up and talk toward that. I brought Rob Helt with me out of the traffic engineering group. He can get into the details of the questions that you might have, but he has a whole history on this. But I won't say much. I think Mr. Godfrey did a good job at explaining and describing what this is. In the end, the benefit for the city is that we no longer have to maintain these things, these devices, over the long haul, and CDOT will be taking over the maintenance of those. So I'll leave it at that. I don't think I need to get into details. I want to say one more thing. Is the installation initially was done through a federal grant, so there was no initial city outlay of funds for the installation, as all just another piece of information to consider.
Any questions for Mr. Frisbee or Mr. Help? All right, thank you, sir.
Okay, you're welcome.
Mike?
Okay, so I'm going to go through a series of line item transfers that the city is requesting. What basically we're doing is there's about $12 million in South Academy funds that we're not going to need till next year. So we're going to move out about $3.1 million this year and then put that back in the 2020 budget. The first item we have is we put $700,000 into the Black Forest widening to get that started this year. We started with an RFP to get a designer on board, and we negotiated a contract. We're going to do that in task order. So the first item that we're going to approve, I'll ask later for approval, is a design package for preliminary design. And that came in about $739,000. So I'm requesting $500,000 go into that project to cover that $39,000. But also, if there's some right-of-way needs that come up, if we can get to that point this year, we'd like to start acquiring right-of-way. And then there's some program management costs that we have with Nolte. So I just put in some money there just to have enough, so I'm not coming back for little bits and pieces, so we can get through the year on that one. And Black Forest basically is we're widening it from Woodman to Research. And then I'm just going to roll through.
Just keep rolling.
All righty. Next transfer we're requesting is for the Tejon Roundabout. That is about a $1.5 million project that we have federal funds. The bids came in. We actually bid that twice. The first time we only had one bidder, and the bid was like $2.5 million, so we rebid it. And Blue Ridge came in with a bid of about $1.66 million. So we're a little short there. The memo kind of summarizes my anticipated cost of 2.1. We have 1.5 available in the fund, so I'm requesting $600,000 to go into the intersection improvement traffic program so that we can pay for that project. This memo also is asking for authorization to award the contract to Blue Ridge. So on the second half of the memo, you'll see that for the actual construction, we're only going to need about $134,000 of the RTA money. The rest of that $600,000 will be used to cover the construction management and material testing, and there's some contingency. I put in 10% contingency in there to have for the project. Next item is, yes. Yes, so that one's actually a two-part. It's approving the line item transfer and approving the contract.
Okay.
Next item is we want to move $1.2 million from Academy into the citywide intersection improvement program to help cover the costs for the Parkside and Printers Roundabout that we're putting in there. That is just on Printers Parkway, just south of Pikes Peak. It's a wide median that has a really bad history of accidents. So we looked at that several years ago and came up with the best solution was a roundabout. We put in for a grant, but the grant's only about $600,000, and with the escalating costs and some of the delay we've had getting this project to design, we now are looking at a cost of about 1.9 total, and we only have about 833,000, so I'm requesting 1.2 million to cover that cost. And again, that's to cover the construction and some contingency in there. The next item is we are looking at funding. So the city is going to do a update to their transportation plan, the intermodal transportation plan. The last time that was done was back around 2000. So this study will look at the city roadway system and come up with recommendations of where improvements are needed. The city has in the general fund budgeted $500,000 to start this, but as we were going through the scoping of the work, we realized that we probably needed another $500,000 to do a good job to really get a good idea of what our needs are for the next 10 to 15 years. So I'm requesting that we put in $500,000 into the roadway and safety operations to help fund that project.
All right. Do you want to go now, Mr. Gonzalez? Mr. Gonzalez has a question.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So on this one, this original budget was from the general fund. So why is the city not putting the additional costs from the general fund to this one?
Well, our budget is pretty much committed. When I was talking to the traffic people and we're talking about the scope, I said, I think we really want to make sure that this project, the study is done properly. And I said, let me go to the board and ask them to supplement that so we can do a proper study. We have used RTA money to do studies, traffic studies, corridor studies in the past, so this is not something we haven't done before.
Did you ask the city council for Colorado Springs first before coming to us, or did you come to us first?
No, I did not.
Okay.
Any other questions on that specific issue? Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the study, what will be the end product for the $1 million total that we're spending?
We will have a study that has, first of all, it's going to have a pretty robust public process. We're going to get a lot, meetings and input from citizens to see what their concerns, where they have areas of concern or need, and it'll come up with an analysis of what corridors, what intersections have congestion now or will get more congested in the future. We'll have level of services now and future level of services to identify intersections, corridors that might need to be widened. And we'll also have some preliminary concept designs and costs that'll tell us kind of what kind of funding we're going to be needing.
So as I follow up on that, then part of what this will do is help shape this projects the city submits in the second Pikes Peak RTA renewal. Is that
I
correct?
think what it'll do is it'll give us a list of projects so that we can go after funding in general, whatever that may be.
But as I focus on this board,
Uh-huh.
where,
I would imagine some of those projects would make the list.
okay, and I note that, I'm new to this board this time, but that capital project reoccurs, and we put the initial ballot on in a presidential election year, and we put the renewal in a presidential election year, and 2020 is the only presidential election year between now and the expiration of the RTA. So I'm not sure if we will depart from it, but certainly it seems to make sense as we go forward to have some idea as to what the different projects are and how we're going to address them. And I think that is tied directly to the Pikes Peak RTA because we want to make sure that these funding projects are there. So I appreciate it, but let me just follow up. You haven't said it specifically, but as we send these dollars away, all of the dollars we are taking out of the academy reconstruction are going to go back in when we actually let the contract for construction, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, all the other projects is taking RTA project to another RTA project. This is RTA project to what is a general funded project. My other concern is looking at it, we're going to be funding a bike master plan. Sure, it's got road dighting stuff in there. I know nobody likes to hear that.
No, that was already done. That's just saying this
It's in
this
there.
document will support the existing plans that are there now, which includes the transit master plan, the bike master plan, the thorough plan. Those are all projects that have been done, but we need to update the overall project plan to see how that fits in with these other ones.
So this project will not be doing bike master plan stuff.
No, it's more congestion and travel demand.
And Mr. Sonnenberg, can you relate again, I don't know specifically what the CAC vote on that particular project was?
Looks like 13-3 according to the CAC summary.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay.
So,
Mr. Waller.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess here would be my only question. If we're doing a traffic study on a plan that includes some RTA projects, but also includes projects that are not within the RTA, are we then, Councilmember Williams talked about it, we're going to have to go back to the voters at some point here. Are we spending RTA dollars on stuff that wasn't contemplated when the voters passed the RTA? I mean, if there are some of the projects in this list are not within the scope of the project approved list by the voters, are we approving dollars that are then not being spent for RTA purposes? That's and maybe we are. I don't know.
If I might.
And who said, oh, Mr. Williams, thank you.
Thanks. Let me just clarify then, Mike, in response to Commissioner Waller's question, the roadway safety and traffic operations, was that in the list of approved projects by the voters?
Yes, it's one of the approved programs.
Okay.
And I guess what I like to say, from
Well,
the staff, or go ahead and finish that.
There were several city categories that were broad, and roadway safety and traffic operations is a broad category to allow flexibility. And so in answer to your question, which I think is an important question, was this approved by the voters? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Okay. And I guess what I'd like to say about this study is that from a staff perspective, we're not looking so much as to what funding we're going to use. We have an old plan that needs to be updated so that we can see what the needs are. And we're not looking at necessarily of if it's federal, are we going to go after federal money, RTA 3, or whatever? It's just, we need to know what projects are priority and get a good idea of the funding needs, and then, seek funding. We have intersections that need work, and there's a lot of grant projects that come up that we may have a few intersections that we're thinking of using RTA funds, but if a federal grant comes along, we'll take that, use that money, and then that leaves the RTA for other intersections. So we're not really, like I said, at this point, we're not dividing projects or the study into it's going to be an RTA project or a city fund. It's just needed projects that we'll identify, and then we'll figure out how to fund it.
Any other questions? All right, I think you are now to the pedestrian transportation improvements.
Okay. On this one, the memo was asking for line item transfer to the Fillmore Transit Project and the Van Buren Safe Routes to School. I'm going to pull the Van Buren Safe Routes to School off of this request because that project also includes road dieting, basically, Van Buren, and we have a policy that we need to come to the CAC board with a written update. So I'm going to do that in June. So for today, the request is to move $100,000 into the Fillmore Corridor Transit Project to help with some shortfall. We're designing that, and we should go to construction or bid this summer or fall. But basically, we have a cost estimate of about a little bit less than $900,000, and we have about $800,000 available. So we're looking to supplement with RTA out of the pedestrian transportation improvements program, $100,000, and that's basically our missing sidewalk program. And that sidewalk program has a list, or Ryan Phipps, who runs it, basically has identified big chunks of sidewalk in quadrants, and that we kind of rotate from year to year. But we also use this project to help shore up grants and other projects that might be a little short of funding. So in this case, we have transit money, a transit grant, and a CDOT grant that are paying for the bulk of the work, but we're a little short, so we're making pedestrian improvements along Fillmore, so use of the missing sidewalk program is an appropriate funding source, so we're asking for $100,000 to go into that one.
Any other general questions on items 7A through 7F? Yes, Ms. Williams.
So on 7F, I don't, on 7F, I'm not seeing Fillmore on our list of projects that we approved.
That's because we're using the pedestrian transportation program, which we typically call the missing sidewalk.
And
that one is, let me see.
It's right here.
It's number 3.
no, I've circled that one here.
Number 3.
So, and didn't, when we approved, was it 2C, wasn't that also to do sidewalk?
No, actually, 2C, first of all, is for overlay, but overlay constitutes a alteration, and that triggers ADA requirements. So what 2C really needs to do is put and fix the corners and the ped ramps, not so much sidewalk. They will fix sidewalk, but they don't really replace or put in missing sidewalk. So 2C and the missing sidewalk program actually kind of concentrate in different areas.
Okay. That's it.
Any other, okay, then I think we should go item by item, or just collectively. I have a motion or a head nod to go collectively. Mr. Williams.
I'd move approval of 7A through F.
With the
recognition that Van Buren was pulled out of the project.
and that 7C also includes an approval of the contract.
So moved.
All right. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Okay, 7G, Mr. Chavez.
Okay, we have some contracts for your review and approval. hopefully. The first one is a design contract for AECom for $739,000 to start the preliminary design of the wood Black Forest widening. We'll be doing a little bit of a corridor study to see what the actual roadway section needs to be and move into preliminary design. On that one, any questions? The next item is a change order to AECom's construction management work on Pikes Peak reconstruction. The project's gone about, what was it, about 8 or 10 weeks longer than anticipated, and so this will help cover those additional costs. 8 weeks of construction.
Mr. Gonzalez has a question on that.
Thanks. And that is going to remain 2 lanes each way, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That came up.
Next item is a design contract for AECom for the Academy reconstruction, and that's going to cover both segments. There's actually 2 RTA Academy projects. There's one from Bijou to Airport, and the second one from Fountain to Martin Luther King Boulevard, and AECom will be working on both those segments. So this is for preliminary design. They will need to come back with a change order to do the final design. That's a pretty good-sized project, so we got about a $2.5 million design fee on that one. Next item is just some additional design work that FHU has been working on the Las Vegas Royer crossing now. We're actually going to be closing Royer Street across the railroad tracks, and a new road will be built east of there about a mile, approximately where the CSU Leon Young Center is. There's a light that goes into the facility there, so we're going to punch the road to the south and connect to Las Vegas. And there's a lot of coordination with the PUC that FHU's had to kind of do some extra work to do that, and that's what this $130,000 is for some of that work. And then the last item is construction contract for some intersection improvements at South Nevada. There's a driveway into the new shopping center there that's across from the Big O tire dealership, and we're going to be putting a signal. We got to tear out the median and put a new signal. So this is this $300,000 will cover the construction.
Are there any questions on 7G? Mr. Williams.
It's actually a question for council here. I have a family member, not an immediate family member, who does work for AECom in another state. Their compensation is not tied to the approval of the projects. They receive no compensation as a result of that. And so I don't perceive a conflict, because neither I nor anyone in my immediate family has a conflict, but I wanted to disclose it so that it's clear, and if anyone ever disagrees with that, since I think they're a fairly large construction company and probably show up in a few contracts, just wanted it on the record, and then if anyone ever has an issue, they can certainly raise it with respect to that. Does that sound reasonable, counsel?
Yeah, since the conflict would have to be sort of a personal conflict that's very subjective, so since there's no compensation linked to it, I think that's a completely fair disclosure, and if it changes in the future, we can always reassess.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody want to put Mr. Williams on the hot seat? Okay. No questions on 7G. Can I have a motion, please?
Move approval.
The second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries.
Thank you.
Item 7H, El Paso County, Ms. Irvin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Board of Directors, Jennifer Irvin, El Paso County, County Engineer. We have 3 items for your consideration today. The first one is related to Colorado Avenue. We came to you in May 2018 with an estimated cost for a gas line relocation at $77,304. That was based upon an estimate from CSU. They came back with their actual construction costs for that relocation, and it came in at $99,204. So today we're asking for the additional $21,900 to be approved. The second item is for our annual asphalt overlay contract. This is with Martin Marietta Materials, and we are asking for approval of $7.2 million. I would note that typically in the past years, we've done about $4.5 million worth of asphalt overlay work. This year, we'll see a blip in that, and we're adding extra dollars because we've had a few years of rollover. So we're really trying to invest more dollars into that so we reduce some of that rollover. So asking for your approval on that as well. And then finally, on our Highway 105 project, on our Phase A, our final design, and that's from Woodmore to Lake Woodmore with HDR Engineering. We are asking for some supplemental funds for final design in the amount of $413,000. We have an access challenge up there, and so we have final design, but we want to make sure that we are doing the right thing and looking at all the alternatives. So we are doing some additional alternative analysis for those access points up there. And then, in anticipation that that might change the design, we added some funds in there for that design change, if it is necessary. And then also, we are doing some additional geotechnical analysis on a retaining wall that is adjacent to the roadway. It was done on a private property, so we want to make sure that the improvements that we do, if they impact that wall, that we're making sure that it's stable. And then, in addition, we're having to do some additional survey. And then, in coordination with property acquisition, we are doing a detention pond for the project on one of those private parcels and obtaining an easement. The property owner is asking us to do a little bit redesign on that because he has some future development plans there. And so if we can orient that that's more beneficial to him, I think we'll get a better price on our property acquisition. And then finally, some additional monies for property acquisition. So we're trying to button this project up so we can get to construction, and so that's what we're asking for in relationship to Highway 105.
Any questions about item 8H? 8H, Mr. Williams.
And this disclosure is one that I presume my fellow board members have made already, but the three members from the city all sit as board members of Colorado Springs Utilities.
And it's shocking that the cost at West Colorado is more than it budgeted.
But having said that, none of us receive compensation as a result of this particular contract, but it certainly does involve an approval of a payment to CSU, of which we are board members, and of which I happen to be the vice chair. Again, I do not believe this poses a conflict, since none of us have a personal interest that receives any compensation, but I wanted to disclose it so it's on the record for all future times. I'm doing these blanket disclosures in this meeting, so I don't have to do it each time, but again, if anyone has a specific concern with respect to our ability to vote on that, please feel free to address it. But otherwise, I believe that because I have no personal interest and none of my colleagues do, that it is appropriate for us to vote on the award of this contract. Council, is that rational? Thanks.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you. So back to the West Colorado Avenue. So that is not a request to increase the overall budget of West Colorado.
Correct. We have some monies in there. And just to let you know, we are continuing on with that project and hoping to maybe do an update here for you here real soon on how we're doing on that project. If you've been down there, it looks really nice, and we are making a lot of progress. So, but I do want to provide an update, and I'm asking staff to get together something so that we can see where we are on that project and make sure that we're on track. We are starting to plan the ribbon cutting, and we just had our coffee with the contractor providing an update, and that project has been a difficult project, but when our contractor gets applause from the crowd, I think overall we're doing a good thing.
Any other questions for Ms. Irvin?
Move approval of 8H.
Do I have a second?
How about 7H?
7H, sorry.
Second.
You'd better
All in
write that.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you for your consideration.
Item 8A, City of Colorado Springs Transit Services Monthly Report. Mr. Blewett.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Craig Blewett, Mountain Metro Transit, City, Colorado Springs. Our monthly report is in your packet, just a few highlights. Our ridership on local routes so there's a decrease in all of our services. Let me explain some reason for that. March 13th, we had a blizzard, and that, of course, we closed down for the day. We also had 2 fewer weekdays in March of 2019 compared to March of 2018. And we had another number of other snow days that impact our ADA service. When the day programs are closed, almost half of our ridership goes to day programs, and they close if there's bad weather, whether the city is shut down or not. The ridership on our local fixed route service showed a decrease of about 5%. The ADA service had a decrease of over 13%, and Vanpool also had a decrease of 10.7%. So the road to Denver was equally bad on March 13th, and so that did impact our ridership. A couple of projects to mention in the projects section. So we are, the service changes were implemented on April 29th, including the new service to the northern hospitals. So that's terrific. We're real happy to be starting that service. We will be beginning 2 major transit plans. One is the 2045 Regional Transit Plan that also includes the Coordinated Specialized Transit Plan, and also the North Nevada Corridor Plan. So the Regional Transit Plan is the plan for the Pikes Peak region for transit, and it's a very important project that will be updating our regional plan. The North Nevada Corridor Plan is looking at a key corridor in the community. It's really an outgrowth of the earlier North Nevada work that was done between Fillmore and Garden of the Gods. This really looks in that segment, as well as the transition or the connections between downtown and UCCS, which is a key transit corridor in the community, and looking at the best type of service, whether it would be continued fixed route bus, frequent bus service, some express service, or even bus rapid transit or streetcar. So we'll be looking at all those options and the alignment for that service as the next step going forward into the future. Be happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Any questions for Mr. Blewett? I do have some. And just a couple. One is since this is informational, I would like at some point to present how the Pikes Peak area ridership is reflecting or not reflecting of national trends in terms of ridership, just to see how things are working. I have heard that Pikes Peak Community College, the route up to Pikes Peak Community College, is not being utilized as much as we hoped. Can you elaborate on that now, or is that something you could bring back to us and tell us where things are going from that perspective?
I can elaborate a little bit. We did do our report back to the Colorado Springs Health Foundation, which is helping to fund that route. And, a bus route, it just started in August of this past year.
Okay.
Typically, it'll take up to a year and a half for a new route to really fully appreciate its potential, fulfill its potential. So it's something that we're continuing to work on and making sure the word gets out to students. We were part of the student orientation back in August as well as in January for the winter semester. We're going to continue those efforts. There's a great Facebook campaign that we can give to you with regard to Arnie the Aardvark, who is the mascot for UCCS. That could be a great trivia question, right? But a great Facebook campaign, brought a lot of attention. There was also a class at Pikes Peak Community College that held a focus group with students to look at ways that we could also grow ridership there.
Okay.
So it is something that we're working on, yes.
And then this is probably totally out from left field, but we read that Colorado Springs is receiving 3 buses as part of the VW or the
Yes.
VW reimbursement. What's the status of your involvement with that?
Sure. So with the Volkswagen settlement, Volkswagen was and Audi were caught at cheating the emission system, right? And they had to pay a financial penalty for that. The money was distributed to states as well as the national level. The state of Colorado I believe this was run by the Public Health Department at the state in terms of how that money would be allocated. They had a draft of that, and then they finalized how that would be allocated. And I believe it was $14 million that was set aside statewide for replacement of diesel buses with low or no emission buses. And the grant allowed us to pay for the difference in cost between a diesel bus and an battery electric bus, plus 10%. And there's a reason for that 10%, and also for the charging infrastructure required to support those buses. We submitted an application for 3 battery electric buses, and were awarded those funds, over $1.9 million, almost $2 million for that. We will go through a competitive procurement process that we need to go through, and then once you order a bus, it can take 9 months to a year and a half to get a bus once it's ordered, because it takes time to manufacture and get in line at the assembly plant. So we are anticipating arrival, I believe, in 2021 of those 3 buses. There's also a competitive grant opportunity for what's called LONO. It's a federal program from the Federal Transit Administration. It's due next the 14th. We're submitting on Friday, and we're going to be requesting funding for 5 additional battery electric buses. So it's in terms of cost, it costs more for a battery electric bus. It's almost twice as much. It's about $1 million for a battery electric bus, just under $500,000 for a diesel bus. The last 15 years, 12 to 15 years. So we've done a financial analysis, and a lot of that really depends on pricing of fuel, electricity costs, and diesel fuel costs. It's hard, if not impossible, to predict what costs are going to be 5 to 10 years from now. But based on our analysis, there is front-end costs to get into it, but then we will start realizing savings. It's our current policy to only buy battery electric buses when we have grant funds that pay for the difference between a diesel and an electric bus at this point. So that's why we're submitting for the grants that we are.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Bullock? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Item 8A, 8B, City of Colorado Springs monthly change order and property acquisition report.
Mike Chavez, City Engineering. This is an informational item. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Chavez? Thank you, Michael. Item 8C, El Paso County monthly change order and property acquisition report. Can you be faster than Mike, Ms. Irvin?
Yeah, any questions?
There are none. Thank you very much. Item 9A, legislative report. Yes, there you go.
Rick Sonnenberg, Pikes Peak RTA Program and Contracts Manager. There were 3 bills that the board was reviewing and tracking. And looking at your memo in your packet, the first one was Senate Bill 51. That was mandating a dedication of additional state general fund money to fund transportation needs. That the board voted a motion of support, and we sent the letters. That was, but the legislature and committee postponed it indefinitely, so that killed it. The second one is Senate Bill 138, and that was expanding bonding to all construction contracts on public property using public or private funding. The board approved a motion to support. We sent the letters. The bill passed both houses and was signed by Governor Polis. The third bill is House Bill 1258, which has passed both the House and the Senate, and the content of that is if this legislation passes, then the legislature will be referring to the voters a ballot measure that if the voters approve it, then the excess state revenue above the Tabor limit would be allocated each year by the legislature automatically, a third to schools, higher education, and transportation. So I checked on the status of this morning, mid-morning, and again, it had passed the House and then the Senate on April 29, but the legislature's website did not show if the governor had taken any action on it. as of mid-morning this morning.
Any questions on the legislative report?
Does anyone know of any action by the governor on House Bill 1258 that I don't know?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Item 9B, the I-25 gap funding plan.
Your memo outlines the plan to pay CDOT $10 million over several years for the voter-approved ballot measure in November 2017 for the El Paso County portion of the I-25 GAP project. The first step was to receive the external auditor-approved dollar figure of the capital funds over budget for 2018. So it's the capital portion of all the revenue received over budget for 2018. So again, capital is 55%. So Beverly's number of $3.6 million and change was confirmed by the auditor. I've handed to each of you an email that I sent to John Hall of CDOT yesterday after I received the auditor confirmed capital portion of the revenue over budget. So you'll see there it's $3,614,141. So that's what we are inviting CDOT to invoice us, but we can't pay it until our 2019 budget goes through the mid-year budget amendment, which is this year, as usual, the June-July cycle. So when the board approves the 2019 mid-year budget amendment with this money added in, then we can cut that check on July 10. John Hall at CDOT also asked us to estimate, not legally committing, but just estimate when we would pay the balance. And we, as staff, are just estimating a round figure of $5 million for July of 2020, and then the balance of about $1.4 million in July of 2021. Of course, if revenues exceed our very ultra-conservative estimates, then, and we can pay off the entire balance of the 6.4 balance, then July of 2020, then we will so recommend. That's the plan.
Any questions? All right, thank you. I-25 GAP project update, item 9C.
Not too much new. This is just a rolling list of what's happened historically, and the only updates are from the CDOT rep who sends me an email monthly is that the construction sections are generally on schedule. Just information.
Any questions? Mr. Williams?
Can you forward us a copy of the, and you may have already sent it to the other board members, the traffic and revenue study with what those recommendations are for when the tolls would operate and what they would be? This is the last, item 7 that's in here.
Will do.
Which says it's been completed and with recommendations. And we may want to weigh in on those recommendations as a board and as local governments. So I'd like to see what those recommendations are. So if you can put that on there, with the approval of the chair and vice chair, however that process works now, I'd like to see that as an action item on a future board meeting where we give input, because it says they're going to make the decision closer to the time of, if I'm reading it right, close to opening day, so there's still time for us to give input.
Yes.
I think we ought to give input since it's our residents that will be affected by it.
And that is from previously what they had said to me, which the first 2 or 3 months, they wouldn't be having any tolls because that's when they were going to do the study. So this is interesting that they've already said, oh, this is what we're going to do.
Will do.
Any other questions on the I-25 GAP update? Thank you, Mr. Sonnenberg. Item 10, member announcements. Anybody have any announcements? Mr. Williams.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I've said a lot of things, but some of it is just as the new person. For those who don't know me, my name is Wayne Williams. In 2004, as a commissioner, I made the motion to put the Pikes Peak RTA on the ballot, so I am delighted to have the opportunity to come back to the board in my new role. And this is just kind of on the intro side. I care deeply about this organization. I'm excited to be a part of it. I care deeply about making sure that we fulfill what was promised to the voters so that they can renew it as they did a few years ago with 79.5% of the vote. I think this has been one of the outstanding examples of a successful project where we've actually fulfilled the promises made. Lastly, I would note that some of you may be aware that Commissioner Williams and Councilmember Williams are married to each other.
What did you say your name was again?
Well, apparently we have been, but you get old after 32 years of marriage. So let me explain that that does not mean that Holly and I will always agree on everything. We have it for our 32 years, and I don't see any reason why that would change going forward. I would note that we did, before the city made the appointment, review and get counsel from City Attorney's Office that they felt it was appropriate, that there were no conflicts inherent in my service on this board at the same board that my wife happens to serve on. Neither of us get compensation from anything done by this board, and none of the projects are related to any of the way in which we receive compensation. So, but if anyone ever has a question, always happy to answer, but wanted to do it in terms of disclosure. And I've done a lot of disclosures today, and hopefully I won't have to do many more, but I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to working with each of you. So thanks.
And just to echo that, you guys don't have to sit apart from each other, and you don't have to sit apart from us. You can all sit up here where we like each other. I don't know what things were like 10 years ago. Anybody else have questions? Ms.
Well,
Williams.
of course, now I have a comment. If anything, having Mr. Williams on the board, I'd probably be more stubborn towards the city, so I apologize, Mike. The next 2 years could be pretty tough. And and that's it. That's it for the day.
Any
And
other-
I was running late, so,
Oh.
you'd meet up at the end of the day.
Any other questions, comments? Then we are adjourned. Thank you.
Your mic's on.
Oh, it is? This one makes sense. It does. Yes. It's a European microphone, I think.